How great is that? Welcome to Pass the Tots. My name is Mike Craig. I am the co-founder and chief customer officer at Nutrislice, and I am thrilled today. We have just a special guest. We have joined with us Lisa Eberhart from Menu Analytics. Lisa, how are you
Hey,
doing?
I'm excited to be here. How are you doing?
Yeah. Well, I am always on a perpetual high of optimism and happiness.
Me too.
You do have lots of energy, and I love that about you, Lisa.
Thanks.
Well, Lisa, probably let's just start off with how we met.
I was trying to figure that out, but the way I met you face to face was at your headquarters in near Denver. After
Yeah.
I'd been to another meeting in Denver proper, but we had reached out to Nutrislice a while before because I found it to be really interesting, and we had reached out to one of your salespeople,
Yeah.
and then a mutual friend kind of connected us.
Lisa, you are without a doubt one of the greatest networkers that I've ever met. And what is the secret? I mean, what's your secret to networking? You just seem to know a lot of people and are always eager to meet new friends.
I talk a lot, for one thing, and I talk to people in line. I heard this thing today about networking at trade shows, and it was all the stuff I always do is talk to people in line, hang out where people are hanging out, and hear their stories. I'm very interested in people's stories.
You've always been that way.
Always got in trouble a lot at school for talking too much. A
Well,
lot.
how does a personality like that get into dietetics?
I don't know. Every time I go to a big conference where it's full of dietitians, I look around and think these are not my people. But I really do think that curiosity is a big part of being a dietitian. You know, you need to be curious about people and their issues, especially when you're working one-on-one with somebody with their diet, which I don't do anymore. But just finding out more about them is really important. So when you're working with customers, finding out more about them helps to solve their problems, I think, a little better.
So you think I love that. Curiosity is a defining attribute of a really solid dietitian.
Yeah. Because if you're not curious, you're not really growing. And nutrition changes every day. So you need to be always looking and changing and growing a little bit.
Well, let's rewind the clock. You started out your career. Didn't you start out as like a consultant out of the gates? Is that what you were doing early in your career?
No. When I started, I did cardiac rehab. That's when people they still have heart attacks, but it used to just be men that had heart attacks. And I would work with them on their diet and exercise. And I actually worked out with them. It was part of a hospital program. I was good at that because you had to be chatty and get to know them and find out, what they ate and when they exercised. So that's how I started. And then I ended up starting a private practice that grew pretty big in North Carolina. And then I ended up working as a consultant for NC State, just a few hours a week.
Lisa, I can envision you in a weight room lifting weights with men who, needed some help, and you're just chatting away, asking them all sorts of questions about life and diet and health.
The key word there is really old men. They're really old.
Really old
So,
men.
so I could keep up with them.
Well,
No
what's the
problem.
secret to starting a conversation with a really old man?
Well, food is always a good starter. They usually start out with, I don't cook. My wife cooks. Do you want to talk to her instead? But she wasn't there, so we had to talk to him about what he liked to eat and stuff.
So
It was fun.
it starts there. You build up this amazing practice, and you keep going. What happened after that?
So one day, NC State called, and at the time, I was the chair of the state licensing board for dietitians. And they called the state licensing board and asked my secretary there, who's a good dietitian? Well, she just said I was. So the person at NC State called me up, and I went in for an interview to do a few hours of work for them for a few weeks until they could find a dietitian of their own. And I left 20 years later. I ended up working for them part-time for quite a few years, and then full-time the last probably 8 or 10 years of the time I worked there. But I wasn't going to stay long. And there were many days I decided I really didn't want to stay longer. But it was still a good gig, and I loved it. I loved that it combined nutrition with food, cooking food and serving food.
That was the attraction. I mean, you had this this growing practice, a successful practice, and then you just kind of jump into the higher education space. There had to have been something there that was incredibly exciting for you.
I just liked the fact that I could work with culinary staff, and to be quite honest, I felt like they had a lot of room for improvement. So I felt like I could make a bigger impact there.
Now that dives into your curiosity. I'm guessing you were asking all sorts of questions, and you saw some major gaps.
Yeah.
I mean,
You know, if
yeah.
you're back in those days, if you were a dietitian and someone had an allergy, you were standing in a walk-in freezer looking at a box, trying to figure out what was in that box, because there was no good data anywhere. This is so long ago. We didn't even have internet. I don't think we had no email. So it was a long, long time ago. So I felt like there was a way to make it this better. I didn't know what the way was because I don't have any technology background, but I felt like my job could get a lot easier if there's a way to get this information in one spot.
Can we just pause? Like, I just, there's got to be a portion of our audience that is begging to ask this question. What was it like to be a registered dietitian before the internet? Like, how did you do your job?
Well, you had to know everything, for one thing. You had to really know your stuff. There's nowhere to look it up.
Yeah.
So if you're working one-on-one with a patient, you couldn't just jump on the internet and put their medications in and find out all the interactions. You just had to know it all, which was made you kind of a know-it-all, but also it helped your memory a lot. I mean, I had tons of things I memorized, and you just knew all those things because you had to use them all the time. I guess it made us a little smarter.
That's fascinating. And so you found yourself, walking into freezers every now and then, trying to ascertain allergy information inside of a freezer. And like, walk me through, how do you even do that?
It was terrible. And back then, many times, if it was a commercially available product, not a retail product, it did not have the information. It might have had the ingredients, possibly. It would never have a nutrition facts label. So you'd have to, basically what I was in the freezer for was to find the company's name and what the product was and the numbers on the packaging, and then call them up on the telephone or fax them and ask them to give you some information. It was very olden days.
So student comes in, says, I have an allergy. You like step into the freezer. I'm guessing like it could be the dead of summer in the humidity of Raleigh, North Carolina. You jump into that freezer. You probably had to have your coat with you. And you're just kind of searching around this freezer looking for who the manufacturer is. You get that information. You step out of the freezer. You walk back to your office. I don't even know how you transpose a fax. Do you like write on a piece of paper and then you put it in the fax machine and ship it off to the manufacturer?
Yep. And then hope they send you back some information.
And what was the turnaround time, average turnaround time?
Oh, forever. It took forever. So students, I would end up highlighting on a menu, a paper menu, the things I knew were safe. And then the things I didn't know, as time went on, I would highlight those things for them. It was very, very archaic.
That is nuts. And was that one of the holes that you saw early on when you were transitioning into higher education?
Yeah, because basically I'm kind of lazy. I didn't want to actually go into the freezer all the time, and I knew there had to be a better way. So I started trying to develop a database of information. And I started kind of slow. And we had a software that we used, Seaboard. And I went to my first Seaboard conference, and I attended only one session. Because after one session, I knew we didn't have the data we needed to make it work, make what I needed to work.
So, what was the vision back then? I mean, just help us understand. I mean, for the audience, I think it's important to know that you're kind of there's some early adopters in menu transparency and showcasing, nutrition, ingredient, allergy information to a customer base. But I definitely would say that you were at the forefront of this. And was this always the vision of how food should be communicated that you
Yes.
had?
Yeah, but I didn't really know how to do it. I just knew that somehow at the point of sale or some way, a customer needed to be able to find out what was in the food. I didn't really know how to do that, but I knew that's what needed to happen.
And so you're just kind of plowing along. You have this vision. This is what needs to happen, and you're trying to reconcile, food manufacturers and the data that they have with technology and new databases and systems, and you're kind of seeing a gap, and all at the same time you're trying to communicate something at the point of service.
Yeah. And it got done. So I got back from that Seaboard conference. I really spent the whole rest of the Seaboard conference at the pool. And the whole time I was really devising a plan to come back to NC State and put this data into Seaboard. Because the one thing I learned at that one session was we didn't have any data. But the other thing I learned was where you could put the data if you put it into Seaboard. So we had not used that field at all because we had no data. And then I started down the road to put the nutrition information and ingredient list into our software because I knew that was the first step. I didn't know what to do next. And I had a bunch of dietetic interns that worked for me, and we just spent about 3 months doing it. We got it done in 3 months. And then we had to go to our next step, which was integrating that data somehow into a way that students could access it.
So step one was this massive project of getting all your data into a system.
Yeah.
And having it there. Had it been done, had you seen other universities at the time doing something similar?
No. I felt like we were really, there was other software you could use, but I feel like we were trailblazers in that area.
Yeah. For manufacturing friends, what was it like working with them? Were they looking at you with, one eye raised, curious as to like what you were trying to do when you're asking for the data?
I think overall they were very helpful. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to get it done. I got it done in about 3 months.
Yeah.
So they were super helpful.
They were communicating.
Yeah.
Facts were sent and received.
Yep.
That's fantastic. Now, so you I just want to dive down just a little deeper. You said, you saw this gap between menu transparency and what was available, what was presented to the students, and the process to kind of get it there. And you just said kind of intuitively that you knew it needed to be done. Now, was there anything more to that? Like you mentioned curiosity. Were you at that time talking to customers and students and they were kind of complaining about those things? Or was this just a visionary, intuitive desire that you had, to bridge the gap of menu transparency?
I wanted to give accurate information to the student or the customer, and I felt like there wasn't another way to do it that wasn't super labor intensive. So I decided to do it that way. There's no vision here. I just had a need, and the customer had a need, and I knew that there was a way to do that. But I can't tell you how naive I was. I was super naive. I thought I put all this information in and then somehow we get it out. But I didn't really know how to do that. And luckily we're a technology university, so I had lots of students that were pretty technology savvy.
Yeah.
And I hired a guy that worked for me that was super technology savvy. And along with we had a really good IT group within our department, and they made it all happen. We ended up having to do a lot of stuff though.
Well, yeah. So walk us through. This project finishes, you and your dietetic interns, and you've got all the information in your database now. What was the first place where you started to display nutrition allergy information to your students? And just walk us through kind of those first steps and what that looked like for the customer experience.
Well, this was when iPads first came out. And so a lot of the guys in the university IT area were super young. They were straight out of Big Bang Theory. They were just like sitting on their couches trying to think about things that they could do at the university to make it cooler. And I met with them, and they just said, well, how about we put an iPad up, which was super new actually, and get students to access the menu on the iPad, and then we'll sort for allergens and ingredients. And they did it. And it was really cool and very cutting edge. And I actually presented about it a number of places because nobody else had done it. And everyone was quite excited. We went way beyond that, but that was our first place that we did it. And students
You
were pretty
developed,
excited about it.
so the students developed an app, essentially, is what you're saying.
Basically, yeah.
And I mean, okay, so I have to ask the question, like, what was the name of the app? And yeah, tell us more about
I don't know if it even had a name. It was just,
it.
to me, because say for a complete Luddite, it was just a spot they could touch on this iPad and get the information. It just happened automatically for me. I just said, this is what I want.
Well, how did the data flow from your system into this app?
Oh, I have no idea.
But it did.
I really don't. But it did. Eventually, we had to do an API to make the
Eventually.
data flow eventually. But in the initial, I'm not sure exactly how we did it. This is really how naive I was about the whole process. I just found people that understood it, and they probably explained the whole thing to me, but I ignored it, and they just made it happen. And I was happy when it happened.
Well, a hat tip to you. I mean, just the curiosity to start to display these things. So you have an app. Where is the next place that you put your menus?
Well, then we decided we wanted, of course, we always had them online.
Sure.
So the app probably connected to our online menu. So we had them online, and we had the touch screen that they could use. But then we ran into the problem that sometimes the touch screen didn't match the online menu, which also didn't match what we were actually serving. And so we had to go through this whole long, very painful process of figuring out how to get all the data into one database that everyone pulled from. So we had to start planning our menus within our system. We had to start, we needed an API and other things so that we can communicate what was in our system out to the digital, not the digital menu boards yet, out to the website, the touch screens on campus, and what was actually being served.
Yeah.
There was a little hiccup in that we had digital menu boards too, and we had 20 some digital menu boards that had to be manually updated every day, which was going to give you mistakes. If at a bunch of locations, people were going to have to manually put a menu in along with allergens and pricing and everything else, and there's going to be mistakes there. And eventually, that's why we did the API, so we could link the actual menu boards to that one source of truth.
Now, you're a problem solver. So how are you solving problems at that time?
I don't know, probably a lot of stamping of my foot and stuff and saying, we're a technology university. There's got to be a way to do this.
There's got to be a way. I just envision myself.
And I had people that understood.
So I just think you're a problem solver at heart. You see a gap and you're like, let's go solve it. You're not afraid to roll up your sleeves. And I'm sure you had quite the student team working for you. And there was probably just a lot of manual labor of kind of pushing this forward and bringing the transparency to the students. Now, that's the operational side. During this time, what kind of feedback and interactions were you having with the students themselves?
Oh, great feedback. I mean, they were very, very appreciative, because at this point, menus weren't very transparent. So they could come to NC State and they could see everything that was in every ingredient. And that's very helpful to a student. Complete transparency is really the benchmark. Students don't want to just have the 8 major allergens marked with an icon, because 1, they don't have a level of trust. And 2, people are allergic to a lot of other things besides the 8 or 9 major allergens. And so they want to look at what's in the actual item.
So you started to develop this brand and reputation for doing a good job communicating transparency.
Yes, I did. And I felt like it elevated the university's brand too.
How so?
And I think because people came to NC State because they had allergies. And we got some really, really wonderful students that came because of the transparency, including one that you're going to interview. And people came there and they could stay because of the transparency. They weren't afraid to eat there. And that helped us get, I feel like, more students, a diverse student body, including people with allergies. And there's kind of a funny thing that is completely untrue. It's just anecdotal, but we have a really prestigious scholarship at NC State, full ride plus lots of money plus all sorts of other perks. And every single time we have a new class of park scholars, they had lots of allergies. And they felt, comfortable staying at NC State because they could eat there. And I think we would have lost some of those over the years because they would have been fed up with trying to eat in a non-transparent environment.
What I'm hearing is that, in the criteria of student success, food can play quite the role, and transparency and just the forthright communication, all the different fun channels, but just a consistent message around the menu actually helps drive higher levels of student engagement and student success.
Yes. And with nutrition, it does too. So if people are concerned about health and wellness and well-being, they want to know what's in their food, calories and other things. And if they have access to that information, it elevates the brand also. You're going to have things that aren't very healthy and you're going to have things that are super healthy, but just knowing and being able to choose whatever they want, depending on what their goals are, is also really helpful for the brand.
Back in the day, I would imagine that there had to have been some business person that probably looked at what you were trying to do with regards to this transparency and thought, this is a lot of work and it might not be helpful to our bottom line. Was that the case?
Yes. And
how did you navigate that? To kind of explain that experience and process.
Well, I don't know. My person I directly reported to did understand that there was a problem with allergies, and we needed to make sure that we did what we were supposed to do with allergies. But that person also was very, very interested in having a profitable food service. And so if you're going to spend all this time and all this effort to kind of a niche group, at first they're thinking this is a niche group, just people with allergies. Why should we do all this work for them? But as it turned out, a lot of people want to know what's in their food, one. And two, once you go in there and look at the ingredients and really look at what ingredients you're buying and what's in those ingredients, what the recipes are, because you need accurate recipes to get accurate information. And we were not known for our accurate recipes. We used basically our system as a shopping list, and we didn't stand by the actual amounts of ingredients in recipes, and not really even that we were putting all those ingredients in or not adding something additional to them. So once I went through every single recipe and every single ingredient and made sure that all the nutrition information was accurate, we were able to save a lot of money, which brought the business side of the operations on board. It was a significant amount of money every year.
When you say significant, we realize that everyone's a little different, but what exactly does significant mean?
Well, this is what I've been told, that every year we served more students, but our total spend on food for like 3 years in a row went down by $100,000.
You're growing,
even though we're serving more.
Yeah, growing sales, growing participation inside your programs, but decreasing the actual cost to serve those
food
students.
Cost, yeah, quite a bit. Also, chefs were able to trust the recipe. They used to use it kind of as a guidebook because, that might work. Whenever I order for this recipe, it says, 10 cases of spaghetti noodles, but really only takes 2. I just cross through it and order 2. But if a new chef comes on board, he has to have the time where he orders 10, and you end up with all this extra product. Or they know that it's not a gallon of chicken base you put in there, it's a cup. But there are all sorts of little mistakes like that in our recipes that would impact the cost.
Yes, for sure. So when you talk about like all the benefits here, I think essentially what you're doing is unifying recipes and standardizing the system from a central, this is the recipe. And we do that because it's going to give us the best chance to communicate clearly to our customer what is happening with this menu item. The pushback that I've seen from chefs is that they like creativity and they look at that as kind of a damper on their creative spirit, the uniqueness that they bring, the art to food. How did you navigate that kind of operator experience? Dealing with the chefs and their need for uniqueness and creativity with the recipe.
It's a battle every day. But you have to have a good relationship with the chefs, and they need to be involved in new recipe ideation. And there needs to be a process that new recipes go through so that you can figure out what's in the food before you serve it. But also you can have areas where they can come up with some interesting special of the day that isn't analyzed.
Okay.
The thing that helps the most with chefs and the management team is to say, well, if you just make things up, you don't know the cost. And if you don't know the cost, we don't know what to charge. And that sets us up to not make money. So the two-edged sword of, yes, we'll be able to tell what is in the food we're serving, but also we'll be able to tell how much it costs to produce and what we should be charging for it, especially if it's a retail item. And thirdly, you want it to be standard so that the next time someone makes it, it's just as delicious as the first time that the chef created it.
Yeah.
And so getting them on board with that was really important.
That's fantastic. All right, so you've got momentum now. I believe around this time, you're starting to get a lot of interest from other universities, other dining programs across the country that are kind of taking a look and seeing what you're doing. And tell us about that stage of your journey.
Well, everybody was having the same challenges I was having. All schools were. I mean, people asked questions, and we got to go around and speak at a lot of different, not just college food services, but other food services and prime vendor conferences and other things where people just were always asked the question on how do we figure out what's in the food we're serving. So we ended up going all around and developing some real good relationships with other universities and trying to help them matriculate towards that one source of truth and good data. At the same time, we kind of got the attention of restaurants because restaurants were struggling with the same thing. Like, Lisa, can you come help us? And we had some different franchises on our campus, and some of them didn't have the nutrition information done, so I did it for them. And then some had it done, and I corrected their information. So I started developing a relationship kind of with restaurants and getting their information in order or helping them get their information in order. And that was the actual brainchild of why my business partner, Randy Lait, and I started Menu Analytics, because it seemed like we actually got some work, and we did it outside of the university. And it was, it was just a little bit of extra income, and it was interesting, and it was helping out these different restaurants. We really did it as a favor. At that point. And after a while, we thought, well, you could probably do this after you leave NC State. So I decided to have that business plan to leave NC State at some point, because I already felt like I had done what I could do at NC State. I really felt like I was finished. So I decided to start the business.
Yeah. Well, before we transition to Menu Analytics and introduce that, when you look back at your time at NC State, what do you think are the 2 or 3 kind of greatest accomplishments, things that you really help put in place for success in that dining operation?
Well, for my personal success in the position, it was the one source of truth and making sure that people could know what was in the food. But what I professionally thought was the best thing I did was I got involved with Michelle Obama in the Partnership for Healthier America, and they did a college and university initiative. And we were the very first school to actually achieve those goals. And we achieved them within a few months of getting the marching orders. And nobody else did it for years because it was hard to do. If you're not completely transparent, it's really hard to do. So the Partnership for Healthier America, that was really something that I felt very proud of. And then one of my personal goals was to be named in the top 25 healthiest campuses in the nation. And finally, we got on that list. It was a little bit political to get on that list because they try not to push people off that are healthy.
That's right.
So anyway, we ended up finally achieving that.
And
also, I wanted to be one of the top FAIR schools, which is the food and allergy Resource and Education Network. And we were one of the first, if not the first, to do the complete fair audit so that our students could know what was in the food, but also that we collaborated with different stakeholders on campus to make sure that disability services and housing and other things understood how a person with severe allergies could live safely at NC State.
That's awesome. What a contribution, what a career. So as you're kind of wrapping things down, winding things up at NC State, you're kind of looking back, and so many individuals and other universities, institutions, including restaurants, are starting to reach out. And this is the genesis of menu analytics. Is that right?
Yeah.
So
So we decided there was a niche that needed to be filled.
And what was that niche?
That there weren't very many people out there doing nutrition analysis. There were some companies, definitely, but I didn't feel like there were companies that had the food service prowess that our team did. You know, with Randy Lait being a real food service king of food service, understanding food service and how it works, and then having a registered dietitian that understands food and how it works, not just food from just looking at the numbers, but understand how food is cooked and served and how it really works in a food service setting, made us unique. So I felt like we could leave NC State and do this and really actually fill a niche. Because there are places that do analysis, and a lot of them don't have registered dietitians on their staff, or they don't have real food service professionals on their staff.
That's awesome. And so as you start menu analytics, tell us a little bit about the journey and kind of what you've experienced since the inception of the business.
Well, so I left in December 2019, NC State, and Randy left in February 2020. So that was like a month before the pandemic. And we did a lot of work in those first few months. But then when the pandemic hit, we figured we were never going to get paid because it was all restaurant work, and they were really, hurting. So we had all this money out in receivables, and our spouses were looking at us like, yeah, this was a great idea. Because pretty much the industry was closed down for a few months. But we were extremely lucky, and we still got business the whole time. And it was slower, but we got business, and every single one of those restaurants that owed us money, every single one paid us. And it was really a good thing that happened, because we did not have a plan for scaling up at all. And we started out going great guns, and I think it would have been super hard for us. I don't wish the pandemic on anyone, but for us, it made us stop and really look at what our business model was and how much did we want to scale up and what were we going to do about that. So there was some fortunate part of that.
Yeah. Well, help us understand some of the unique qualifications and services that you provide at Menu Analytics.
Well, what happens is restaurants or other food service send us their recipes, and we have a point person, and we talk to them about how things are prepared and weights and losses and other things. And then we just do the nutrition analysis on the state-of-the-art software called ESHA Genesis. And we have all sorts of big restaurant groups that do it with us, and really small restaurant groups and really small restaurant chains. So it just depends. We do nutrition labeling for some products that I can't mention because we sign a lot of non-disclosures. But during the pandemic, we actually worked with some groups that I still don't know the names of because of the non-disclosure, but that worked with really high-level chefs, and they took that time during the pandemic to really look at their recipes and try to get things in order, and that really helped us a lot.
That's fantastic. Lisa, before we end today, if you could go back in time and you have a 10-minute meeting with brand new Lisa starting out on her professional journey, what one or two things would you advise her?
I would tell her to try harder.
Try harder.
Yeah, I felt like I spent a lot of time not trying as hard as I could have. But also, I think that I would reassure her that it was all going to work out. Because I think there were a lot of times where I just didn't have the actual skill set to make it work out. but luckily, because of relationships and curiosity and having a good, remember you talked about networking at first?
Yeah.
I had a huge network that really helped me a lot. And I guess I would tell her, build your network, because those are the people that are going to save you when you don't know what to do next.
That's fantastic. Well, Lisa Eberhart is her name. Menu Analytics is her game, her company. She has spent a career as a registered dietitian, bringing sense and sensibility to the madness of food data, and been a true champion of a single source of truth, and helping institutions all over the country and lots of different enterprises, organizations be more transparent with their menus. How many foods do you think you've analyzed in your career?
Oh gosh, thousands and thousands, a lot.
And it's all memorized. You are the single
Yeah.
source of truth for food data.
I wish.
You could,
But
you could probably look at a recipe and can you sniff out right out of the gate if it's correct or not?
yes, I can tell. Well, once I do the analysis, but sometimes just looking at it, I can do it. But once I analyze it, I know for sure if it's wrong.
What a skill set. Well, Lisa, it is fantastic to chat with you. Love everything that you're doing. Thank you so much for coming on today, and wish you the best of luck now and into the future.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the chance.